And backup offers in any market are something you just need to know how to do. And I'm going to go through whether you're on the buyer side or a little bit about the seller side, and then show you what it looks like. It's actually super similar to just writing a regular contract, but I know people get real confused where they're like, do I use the same form to do a backup offer? How does this all work? So when you're on the buyer side, and I'm a little rusty with this class, so I'm going to keep pausing and reading my notes, but the two that I'm going to go over is if you're in a multiple offer situation and you just don't get it, you don't get the house, you're second, and you decide to write a backup offer. The other one would be if you find a house that's already under contract and then you call and your buyer's like, oh, I really want to see this house. It is okay to ask the person, the listing agent, if you can still show the property and if they would ever entertain a backup offer. So here's the plus sides of doing a backup offer. First off, you can keep looking at other houses. You're not tied down. There's no bad faith where there would be. If you have a house under contract and you're in first position, you can't just have your buyers keep looking at other houses. That's bad faith. You have to go forward with the house you have under contract. If you're in backup position, just keep looking at the other houses and see if there's anything else that looks like it would be more reasonable to you. Another second of pluses, or there's no money down. So I don't know that ever in my 20 some years in real estate, I've ever seen one where you put the earnest money into the trust account to hold it in a backup position. It's always, here's your backup offer. We will give you the earnest money within a certain amount of days from being in primary position. But because there's no money down, again, it's not like you're taking money out of your buyer's bank account to kind of hold it in place. There's no harm in it, right? Doesn't cost anything. And then 3, for a realtor, third point, it creates a relationship with your buyer. So as a new agent, I always wanted that reason for my buyers to keep working with me, because I knew they knew you couldn't swing a cat without hitting another realtor in my town. So if they happen to bump into someone they've known before and they happen to have 20 years more experience than me, who's to say that they wouldn't just jump ship with me, even if I've shown them a few properties, and just start working with another realtor. I didn't usually bind people into a buyer's agency when I was new, because I thought, if I get them, great, but I'm not sure this person's going to stick with me, right? But if you start doing a backup offer with them and you go through the whole process and you sit down and you explain the whole offer as if they're going into first position, you're starting to create a relationship with that person. You have a reason to call them every day, even if there's nothing else on the market, to just call them and say, how you feeling? Like, okay, I haven't heard anything, but I know the inspection's tomorrow. So I'll call you as soon as I hear whether it seems like the buyers on the first contract might have a huge inspection objection, or you know what I mean? So you have a reason to start creating that relationship. You're spending a couple of hours to show the property, and then to write up the contract, and then to go over it. And then they'll be more likely, the buyers would be more likely to work with you if this one doesn't go through. So as I was saying, it gives you a reason to communicate more frequently. And I guess this would be number 4. You might get the house at a better price. I guess in this market, that doesn't work all the time, but generally speaking, in a normal market, which we're probably getting more into, where, with the rates going up and maybe some buyers are kind of going to be sitting on the fence with rates and all this turmoil they're hearing with financial markets. What happens in a normal market is a seller feels they have their house tied up. Most sellers aren't that savvy. So they go, well, why would I have a backup offer? Because I have a great offer. They're going to close any day. And the listing agent will say, well, this person's willing to write a backup offer. Okay, well, why not? So where they might have said $400,000 for the first position, they might be like, oh, you gave me $395. That's fine. That's fine. Don't worry about it. So they might sign something that's a little bit better than they did on the first time around. In this market, I don't tend to see that. Usually the backup offer seems to be the same amount or higher, but just know, generally speaking, you would get it at a little bit of a better price or better terms. And then 5th, you won't lose out if the first one terminates. So this is what a lot of buyers would think is, I don't really want to write a backup offer. I'm just going to wait. Just call me if it falls out of contract. Well, when it falls out of contract, you got like 6 people all over again trying to get the listing. So don't take the chance. Just get it wrapped up. It costs no money. Let's just write a backup offer. I'll have it to you. This is what I would tell my buyers. Look, I can get that thing written up in 20 minutes over to you. We'll get signatures. We'll go over it real quick. We'll have it and we've tied it up. So there's no chance of you missing out. Because if you tie it up, then there isn't going to be that long lost friend that the seller hears from and says, oh, I'm so sorry. You didn't know my house was under contract. Well, if it falls out, I'll just tell you, and I'm not going to put it back on the market. That sort of thing. Just get it tied up and that way, let's say you have a loan and the next buyer comes in and they have cash. If you can get that property tied up in backup position, then you don't have to miss out to the buyer that wasn't around the first go around. So say there's multiple offers, you're the second one, you were like almost as good as the one they put under contract, but not quite, but you still had a loan. And then all of a sudden next week, somebody comes in, this is what I was trying to say, is they come in and they have cash and they're like, well, if this falls out of contract, I'm going to scoop it up because I got cash. So again, it's you're in a little bit better position to just get it tied up. And then the seller can't kick you out of that backup position. It is a contract. That's one thing that people don't understand is they're like, is it really a contract? I'm like, yeah, it is as important of a contract as the first primary offer is. You are actually under contract, just in a backup position. So if you have multiple offers, it becomes very messy sometimes, but it's fine. So let's say there are 6 offers that come in, 7, 8, 9, 10, and the listing agent says, sorry, you didn't get it, but we want to put you into backup position. Here's your counteroffer. So they submit to you a counteroffer that puts your position into backup. Okay, so they change the dates, they do a few things. It's messy because as a buyer's agent, you look at it and you go, the dates are all wrong. If this actually becomes in primary position, this is going to be pretty hard because they want us to get our inspection done in 5 days. They want us to get, you're on their time schedule. But if you say, hold on a second, we're going to counter you, you're losing time. So in this market, I would probably suggest, it's always up to your buyer, just get it under contract, right? Just tie it up. Don't dilly-dally. That's the worst thing you can do in this market is the buyer's like, well, could you change that one day? It's like, let's just get this under contract and we will do as much of our due diligence as possible in backup position. So if we do go into primary position, we're like ready to go, right? So if the first contract's already under, your buyer comes into, they come into town a week after it went under contract. So what I did as a buyer's agent is I'd call the listing agent and say, hey, would you be comfortable? Can you tell me more about anything about the contract you have under now? My buyer's really interested and they might want to put it into a backup position. So if it closed in a week, if they said, look, we're past all our deadlines, we close in a week, I would not bother putting the backup offer. If it was going to close in 2 weeks and they still had a couple things that had to do, or maybe there's a loan and you just aren't sure, why not? What's the big harm? It's 2 weeks. It's not a big deal to just write up the backup offer and do it. A lot can happen, especially if they're not. So definitely if they're not past their inspections, I would consider it. And if they're not past their loan, I still might consider it. Appraisal, those sort of things could happen. So for deadlines, this isn't going to be a whole hour. Doesn't take that long to go over this. Okay. So this is my sample contract that I use to teach my contract classes. And then this part is all the same. And then you get down to here with the deadlines. This is really the only part that changes, okay? There's a few things to take note of that you want to make sure you do in a backup contract, but most of it is all deadlines. So of course, okay, you bet you're going to be in a totally different contract. So maybe just take, like I said, take it with a grain of salt. We have a time of day deadline, so that wouldn't change. Oh my gosh, I forgot to put this one. Oh, see, I'm hustling in the morning and I forgot. So alternative earnest money deadline, whatever this is when the backup contract becomes the primary contract. So these, you have to think calendar days, okay? Not business days. Business days, I did it once. Oh my God, was that hard? Because you're like, okay, wait, it's Saturday, so then you got to go to this date. You're going to mess up. Just do calendar days. But see how I actually write in the word 3 days. That's a backup contract. That's what makes it so hard to kind of put your mind around. So you're thinking in terms of 30-day close, 45-day close, 60-day close, whatever is normal in your market. In our market, I'm guessing it's 30 days, if not maybe 35, 40 days. So I did this whole one, I'm working backwards. So I did this as a 30-day close. And again, I haven't sold real estate in 5 years. So I'm not sure about exactly how the market is. Don't listen to me with like how many days I say it takes to get something closed. Trust the lender, trust the appraiser, trust your employing broker. But this is just as a general, this is how we used to do it 5 years ago. So your time of day would be the same. I would usually put alternative earnest money deadline, think calendar days, and think about you are your buyer and they are on a camping trip and you get a phone call on Friday night that says, we'd love you to be in primary position. And you go, oh my God, they just went camping. They're going to be back Sunday night. So think you have Friday, they told you on Friday. So then you got Saturday, Sunday, they have to get the earnest money in Monday. So if you tell them Sunday, you are in first position, you got to get that money in tomorrow. That seems reasonable. You put it out any longer than that, then the selling agent will be like, really, it's going to take you 5 days to get it in. So make sure your person, you know their schedule and whether they're going to be out and about or they're going to Timbuktu for a week. But generally speaking, the alternative earnest money deadline should be somewhere around that 3-day mark. I never do it in 1 day because you just don't know. What if the person took a day trip to Denver and they're not back in time? They can't get the earnest money in. They're not going to be able to perform, right? So then think about this. Again, you put yourself in your buyer's shoes. You have a 30-day window of trying to get this closed. The alternative earnest money deadline, the deadline where you are handing over your earnest money, that is the day that all these other ones start, okay? So this is not 3 days from when the person calls, the listing agent calls and said, hey, you're in first position. We'd like you to be in first position. What starts the clock, so to speak, is the day you're putting the earnest money in. You give, and here, we'll just read it right now. I'm going to go all the way down to the documents or additional provisions. This is a backup contract. It is subordinate to a primary contract between the seller and a third party. Makes sense. If the primary contract is terminated for any reason, seller shall give written notice thereof to buyer. So they email you, they call you at the same time. Buyer shall have X calendar days after notice is given in which to deposit the earnest money, meaning handing it over, right? Per section 4.3, that's the earnest money section, at which time this backup contract shall become the primary contract. At any time prior to depositing the earnest money, we'll get into this later. At any time prior to depositing the earnest money, buyer has the right to terminate for any reason. Like I found another house, doesn't matter. You can terminate and just, that's it. It can be an email and a phone call. But here's the part that, and you don't put this in your offer, but I just put it in here. The numbers in the clause date or deadline column shall be the number of calendar days following the date that the contract assumes primary position. And right here, it says primary position is because you handed over the earnest money. So does that all make sense to people? This is when this date, whatever you put in this blank is going to be the date that everything starts. So I would suggest 3 days. And then think about it. If you have a primary contract, they've already done title. They've called Colorado Title Company, whatever company you use. They've already run the title and they've given it to that primary contract. So if that contract terminates and they go with you, it would only take the title company like an hour to change all the information. So 3 days is plenty. If you usually put, oh, I give them 7 days to get that done, you don't have to give them that long. Just think you hand in your earnest money on a Friday night. You want to give them a business day. So you go on 3 calendar days to like make sure they can get that done. And then, as I've said before in other contract classes, if you watch any of the recordings or anything, you always give 7 full days to your buyer to go over title work, off-record matters, association documents. And the reason is you always have to consider yourself standing in court on the stand, and the judge turns to you and said, or turns to your buyer and said, well, why didn't you go to an attorney to get this stuff looked at while you were under contract? And the buyer goes, well, they didn't give us enough time. She expected me to look at my title work in a day and get back to them. That wasn't enough time to get an attorney. So you always think of like the worst possible thing that can happen. And then you think, well, okay, 7 days is plenty of time for the buyer to get an attorney to look over these documents, even though most buyers don't do that, even if you ask them to. Okay. So I always give 7 days in between these two, 7 days in between these two. Again, off record matters. That's already been decided in the first contract. Very rarely would they not have gotten through the title deadline in the primary contract. And then just a couple days for resolution. Okay. Association, the third party doesn't really come up around my area except for like 2 different subdivisions. Association docs, again, they've already pulled those for the primary contract, most likely. So you only give them a few days. And then, so you're trying to like make this as tight as possible to make them want to just sign your offer. Okay. Make the seller just sign your offer. The association documents shouldn't take long to get. So you just give 7 days for your buyer to look at them. And then you think, what are the things that my buyer could get done to show that they really want this house? I have before, when I know my person is familiar with a subdivision, let's say they're moving from one area of a subdivision to another area of the subdivision, they already know what the documents are. So I might even get this done with a real date. I might actually put July 1st in here as association documents deadline, so that even though you're in backup position, you say, hey, if you can get us those association docs while we're in backup, we could just get that taken care of and make you a much cleaner contract. They would love that on the seller side for you to just get that taken care of. Here's another one. If you're waiting for disclosures, just get them to get you the disclosures while you're in backup position. So you can have real dates on these disclosures. Because wouldn't it be nice for your buyer to find out if there's something damaging on the property disclosure that makes them want to bail? Find it out while you're in backup position, so you're not waiting around for 20 days and then you find out, oh great, there's a huge leak in the crawl space and there's mold everywhere. Like, I don't think I would have taken this house anyway. Get those out of the way with real dates. Okay. And then loan application. You should be shopping around and figuring out who you would use while you're in backup position, so they are ready to go and they can get that application in within a couple of days. Some lenders say that you have to be in primary position for them to consider your loan application filled. So that's why I don't get that done ahead of time, because they say, well, until you're in primary position, I can't give you, you can't really have done your application. You don't have it in primary position. Anyway, so I said 3 days. You could have it even shorter. Loan terms, that's that new date where that's the date. It takes 3 days for, by law, a lender has to give you truth in lending disclosures, all those disclosures they have to give you within 3 business days. Okay. So you have 3 days out for this one. So I add 3 days to this one, and the lender has to give it to you. But what if you got your loan application in at 9 p.m. the night before? So I add an extra day for that. And then I add an extra day in case your buyers like want a night to think about it. Oh my God, that rate's a lot higher than I was thinking. Oh, Heather, can we just have a night to think about this and see if we want to go through with it? That's why I set these 2 5 days apart. Even though the law says 3, they'll have the disclosure in their hand. Okay. So loan terms are all those terms that the lender has to give you when you were within 3 days. Loan availability is always the last deadline. If you didn't know this already, that's the last deadline before you close on a property. So if we're doing a 30-day closing, put that at like 25 days, right? Now, again, you're really using your brain for the rest of this. How long does it take you to get an appraisal in your market? How long does it take you to get the ILC in your market, if that's what your buyers are getting? So make some of those phone calls while you're in backup position and just kind of get it lined up so everything can be super smooth if you get in primary position. You called a bunch of surveyors and you have one that said, right now, if you get this house in the next couple of weeks, I could probably get out there in 14 days. Have them lined up so you don't have to do all the due diligence after you're in primary position. And then I don't really know on water rights, it's going to be totally different per market. If I knew it was an irrigated property, I know we were just talking about this, about irrigation, and I knew that my buyers should go to an attorney, I would find out how far out that attorney is. But I'm not going to have my buyer go to an attorney while we're in backup position, right? So I'm going to give them some time after they get under contract to get those done. And then inspection, again, that's totally on your market. There were a lot of times in my market that even when things weren't as crazy as they are now, where it would take me 10 days to get an inspector into a house. So even if you have it lined up that I will call you if we're in primary position, it's not the same as I need you to go out as soon as possible. So try to make your calls and at least find out. Do remember the way the contract changed this year, if any of you were around last year, the termination deadline and the inspection objection deadline absolutely have to be the same day. That's the way the wording is in our contracts now. These, whatever you put in there has to be the same day, okay? Inspection resolution, oh my gosh, that shouldn't say 1 day. I don't know what I meant to say in there. Resolution would be after the objection. I don't know, I put 13 days probably in this resolution one. Property insurance, that's easy. As long as it's not a difficult property to insure, make those calls while you're in backup position and just say, hey, State Farm, would it be hard for you to insure this home? And that way they can get clarity on maybe how much it would cost them to get that insurance, but that shouldn't take you long. Just have them make the calls as soon as they go in primary position and get that wrapped up, whether they want to terminate because it's more expensive than they thought. Please break in if you have a question about any of this. And then due diligence. Due diligence, you write into a contract because the seller has to provide you with something. So if there is something for the seller to provide, they've probably provided it for the primary contract. Like, let's say they said, we have an engineering report on file. You could get that right away. You don't have to wait, right? But if there was some sort of due diligence that the seller had to do, just think about it. Like, oh, how long would it take the seller to do that for me because they didn't have to do it for the other contract? Or is it something they've already done? Around in my area, La Plata County, we have septic rules. So the seller has to actually go out and get the septic test, and then they got to like file it and all that kind of stuff. So if that is the case, 3 days is probably pushing it. That's pretty early. So let's just say the primary position, really got to use your brain. Let's say the primary contract terminates only after 2 days. And then you set this at only 3 days, you're not going to make that deadline. So just think about it and do the best you can. So then you have a objection deadline and a resolution deadline, but just that's the way you do it. You just kind of think through it and how would your brain work? And then I put 30 days for my closing there. Possession date and possession time, unless there's a rental of some sort, I just put day of closing and time of closing. That way, if you have to do amendments on any of the closing dates, you never have to change that. It just stays the same. And it has a real acceptance deadline. So some people say, well, why would it have an acceptance deadline? It's because it's a real contract. You are putting it under contract in a backup position. So again, do put a real acceptance deadline and a real deadline time. Okay, does that all make sense? Let me see if there was any notes on that. Yeah, so this is how I kind of put it in my brain. What can you get done? And what can you schedule or do homework on now, like due diligence deadline kind of things while you're still in a backup position? You just don't want your buyer to have to start spending money. That is definitely a no-no. Okay. Seller. So the other part about it, so there's a couple of things to note. So you do have this section down here in additional provisions, and this does not go into your contract and neither does this. I just wrote those there so that you know what I'm talking about. So it's a backup contract. You decide how many calendar days it takes your buyer to get that earnest money in, but whatever's in this has to be the same one you have in the dates and deadlines section for the earnest money, okay? And no, if your buyer in a regular contract, a primary position contract, if your buyer just decided they didn't want to close, there's no out for them in the contract, right? It has to be inspections or appraisal or the HOA docs. For a backup contract, it doesn't matter. So don't get nervous about calling the other agent and say, we found another home that we're going to be pursuing per my email. Thank you very much for your time. Here you go, right? So don't feel bad about doing that. And that's all self-explanatory, the rest of it. Okay, if you're on the seller side, I'm going to stop sharing this. I don't think I need it anymore. If you're on the seller side, why the heck not would you put somebody in backup position? Even when it wasn't a great market, if I had somebody that was thinking about, let's say you have a buyer's agent and they call you and go, gosh, how's your contract going? I was thinking about showing this house to them, but then I saw you just went under contract. I would be really pushing that person, go see the house. We would love to have a backup contract. They go, oh, why? And I go, look, anything can happen. There's a loan involved. So I don't want to say more, but we'd love to have a backup contract. You're always trying to encourage them to do it because it makes you feel a lot better as a seller's agent, knowing your buyer's not going to be asking you for open houses or anything like that anymore. Not only do they have a contract, but then they can they can actually pack their bags. They can actually start moving because they know if the first one terminates, they're probably going to get that second person to the closing table. So another reason to do it on the seller side is you're not going to get so many requests on inspection. So if you have a backup contract and you can call this is beautiful when you have a backup contract, you can call that other agent, the buyer's agent who has the primary position, and they're like, oh, just wait till inspection. We're going to give you a long list. This house is a piece of work. It needs so much stuff done on it. And you can call them and say, hey, just wanted to let you know, we put somebody in backup position today. So just keep letting you know. And you're just very kind about it, but they go, oh no, okay, there's a backup position. So now every time that they go to ask for more time on something, every time that they go and ask a request on inspections, as a seller's agent, you are more in the driver's seat. You are anyway in this market, but you're really in the driver's seat because you can say, you need more time on your loan. You want 2 weeks. How about we give you 1 week? You better get this done or we're going to go with a backup contract. You don't actually want to kick somebody out of primary position if you're in a seller's, if you're a seller's agent, because then you got to start all over again. And then what if that person has a hard time with inspection? So you don't want to negotiate too hard, but it does keep you from getting so many requests on inspection. Okay, so the other couple of things, if you have a backup offer to write. So that little part in the contract that says if one of the deadlines falls on a holiday or a weekend, that it will or will not extend to the next business day. You have to remember, it doesn't matter in normal times with a normal offer in primary position, what you check there, just know what you check there and that's all. But if you're in a backup position, you absolutely have to check the box that says will extend to the next business day, because you're writing in all those weird dates that say 2 days, 5 days, 7 days. There's a lot. It's very likely that one of those is just going to fall on a Saturday. And now you have a couple extra days to get it done. So remember that. And technically speaking, so let's say you're writing another offer. So you have a backup offer, it's in place. So it is now a backup contract. And then your buyers go out and they find the house of their dreams. So they write the offer on that. So what is the situation? How do you pull off the backup offer? Technically speaking, in Colorado, you don't want to be having 2 homes under contract. It's like a huge no-no. But because you're in backup position on this first one, you can very easily, if you got a call, let's say you tied up house number 2 Friday night, and then an hour later they call you and say, hey, guess what? We just terminated on the first offer or the first contract. We want you to be in primary position now. Well, you haven't handed over your earnest money yet. So the clock hasn't started running. So it is okay to put another home under contract and immediately, like within a minute, you want to be on the phone with the other person and said, hey, we did tie up another home. We're going to be pursuing something else. Thank you so much for your time. I'm going to follow up with an email letting you know that we terminated. Does that all make sense? So yes, you can pursue the new home. You don't have to pull off your backup offer or cancel the backup offer first, but you just want it to be almost immediate that you terminate on the other house. Okay. Does that make sense? Let me see if I had any other notes there. I feel like there was one other thing I wanted to explain, but that was most of it. I think that was it. I think that's really all I wanted to go over with backups. Have any of you done it before? Do you have questions about like how it would work technically? No questions. Okay. Let me just go over my notes and make sure there was nothing else because what happens is I stop the class and then I can pick up like 3 things I should have said. I think that's it. Oh, I knew there was something. Okay. So if you become in primary position, everybody, you hand in your earnest money, all that. one of the first things you should do, whether you're on the listing side or the buyer side, make sure to do an amend extend, which clarifies the dates that everyone thinks those 2 days, 5 days, 7 days were, okay? Because it will never fail if you write something like that into the contract that isn't an actual date that the listing agent and the buyer's agent, for no fault, nobody's making a mistake. They're just counting it differently than you counted it. So it doesn't matter what side you're on. It's not like, oh, it's supposed to be the buyer's agent side. It's supposed to be the listing agent side. Just do an AE. I always like doing it for the other party just to be helpful and to, so that everyone would get along with me. But I would do an AE and clarify, okay, I took the contract and now I'm putting real dates in it. We handed our earnest money in on Monday. So with the clock started ticking. So I'm assuming Thursday is 3 days. So you hand it in and you want both buyers and seller to sign that amendment so that now there are real dates in your contract. Because otherwise what happens, you're on the listing side and you go, wow, they didn't give us any inspection objection. Wow, we are so lucky. And then, you know, midnight goes by and the next day the buyer's agent hands you an inspection objection and you say, inspection objection was yesterday. You can't do it today. So now you're like in this total pickle. So just do an AE and clarify the dates and walk through it with the other agent and make sure you're both on the same page. That's it. Yvette, you came off mute. Do you have a question?
I didn't. I actually couldn't hear, so I had to log off and come back in. Sorry.
Oh, that's cool.